Not quite ready to say this is our 25th year yet. So I'm Bill Kolner. I'm a Muscatine County Master Gardener, and I'm one of the original ones. My wife and myself and another couple here who started this in 2001. The goal this year was to talk about, when we garden, we like to relax and enjoy life. Nothing better than to go out and see your flowers bloom and how exciting it is. Share it with our neighbors. If you raise vegetables, you like to share them with your neighbor. Maybe give them to a food pantry. All kinds of nice stuff. Before we get started with the speaker, who will be introduced in a couple of minutes, I have just some questions that'll be like raise your hand. You won't have to speak. So if you're from Louisa County, raise your hand. Johnson County, raise your hand. Cedar County, raise your hand. Muscatine County, raise your hand. Scott County, raise your hand. Lynn County, raise your hand. Okay, let's see. There's a lady from Stockport, Van Buren County. She's the only one. But we're drawing them from near and far. Okay, what county did I miss? Shout it out. Rock Island. Oh, right across. How about Mercer County? Is any Mercer? All right. Clinton. Oh, Des Moines County. Clinton County. Outstanding. Who else have I missed? Washington County. Thank you. Dubuque. Outstanding. Outstanding. This is exciting. Our theme this year is when you go to the garden, you drop your blood pressure, you relax, and enjoy it. Maybe you've got a hammock out there and you like to lay, or a fire pit, and you look at the flowers and so forth around you. There's nothing better than going out and picking your own flowers and putting them on the table in the house. Nothing better than going out and trimming a tree or a bush. Nothing better than going to an arboretum. I see my arboretum friends in front of me. And looking what nature is doing for us. Every year, our committee has a difficult time to come up with speakers. This year, you've had an opportunity of 30 different speakers. This is the most we've ever had. 30 different speakers. Thank you. Did you enjoy the food today? Give them a hand. Thank you, guy and the girl. Every session you're in has an evaluation form. Please fill it out. And at the end of the conference, it's your last session. Don't take away from listening to the person that's presenting, but fill out the overall conference form that you like, things you want to see improved, or maybe some suggestions for speakers for next year. We're certainly glad to please you. So right now, I'm going to have Brandy Olson come up. She's the chairperson of our Muscatine County Master Gardener Group, and she has a presentation to make. Brandy, you're right here.
Well, thank you, Bill, for those nice welcoming comments. This year, we're starting a new tradition in Muscatine County. We are recognizing an outstanding Muscatine County Master Gardener. This person has been nominated by their peers and appreciated for their dedication to our community and to our Master Gardeners group. They've been a Master Gardener for over 24 years. They've maintained their Master Gardener status despite many moves and life changes and circumstances, so we definitely appreciate their dedication. Their family has a mini farm outside of Muscatine where they have hosted many visitors and tours and are always welcoming to other gardeners from near and far. They're a dedicated volunteer at their church's donation garden. They've been a key volunteer in the Garden of Eden, which last year produced over 400 pounds of produce to feed hungry families in Muscatine. 4,000, sorry. What did I say? I get a little nervous. It's a big group up here, but And it's okay to give a shout out for Garden of Eden because they feed a lot of people. And it's because of the volunteers that they're able to do that. So this volunteer has been a strong supporter of all of our Master Gardener activities. She volunteers in many events and promotes many of our programs. And as her nominees wrote, she does this with grace and little fanfare. So today, we're going to recognize Bonnie Reeb as our Muscatine County Outstanding Master Gardener.
We have the pleasure of a lady who presented at Heartland at Clinton a couple of years ago. And one of our master gardeners who's on the planning committee said, we heard her and she needs to come to Muscatine County. So we wrapped our theme around this lady's presentation for the whole conference, relaxing, enjoying the garden, and making your life better. Ann Ventullo is a clinical psychotherapist, researcher, and death doula. She applies a social justice and holistic lens to her work. Her practices borrow from a variety of resources, including eco-psychology, nature wellness, resilient theory, and empowering practices to aid communities and their individual members in creating lifestyles that are ecologically sustainable and psychologically healthy. Now, if you have your back to the screens, please adjust your chairs around to look at the screens, and please welcome Ann to the stage.
Thank you for that introduction, and I really appreciated hearing some of the different things that this area does. As a social worker, I'm really thrilled about the Garden of Eden. Is that what you all call it? I just love to hear about that. So thanks for the introduction. I don't have to do as much introduction for myself. Currently, I'm spending most of my time as a researcher at the University of Iowa, researching the impact of plant-derived medicines have on trauma and substance misuse. So today we're going to look at wellness in the garden and beyond, how time outdoors supports our holistic health. Right, so I'm used to hosting these conversations one-on-one or in very small groups. So you're going to see me looking at my notes a fair amount. This is one to recenter myself and say, oh, not everybody's looking at me, right? And also just to make sure that I don't miss anything that's useful or important to you all. So my first question, this is the clicker, IT person, this is the clicker, is that accurate? Okay, perfect. I'm just gonna bear with me because I've never used something like this before. So, perfect. I understand how to use it perfectly. Okay. So when we think about wellness, right, we often think about that physical health wellness. If someone is well, they are not sick, right? But what does wellness really mean on this holistic level? And so there's kind of these two important aspects to this definition. Wellness is not passive, right? It's not a static state. It's rather an active pursuit. It's associated with intentions, with making choices, and taking actions. Second, wellness is linked to kind of this holistic picture. It extends well beyond just physical health and incorporates a lot of different dimensions. And the hope is, right, the kind of best hope is that they all work in harmony with one another. Other dimensions there's such a variety of other dimensions, environmental, spiritual, et cetera, but for the length of time today, I figured we'd mostly just focus on biological, psychological, and sociological. So these are often categorized as that biopsychosocial, the needs that we as humans all have. You all do have a handout that has kind of this same visual on it, but I'll also give you just a moment to read through this quickly. Oh, maybe it's in your folder. Thank you for all of you who are guiding this. And so I know there's a lot on this slide. Most of my slides are not going to have a lot on it, but I just wanted to say, hey, if you miss something on this slide when I click forward, that's okay, because you actually have it. But really, the idea is all of this is connected, right? And you'll kind of hear that in today's conversation. All right, so before we look at how the natural world impacts us, I just want to quickly review kind of our brain and our hormones and our nervous system and how daily life as a human is impacted by, or impacts these things. And this review really is aimed at helping you then better understand some of the statistics and information that I share later in our conversation. So we have our nervous system made up of these two different parts, sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So the deer represents our sympathetic nervous system. It's that fight, flight, or freeze, right? We all have seen deer. They're pretty skittish. And so that kind of fight, flight, or freeze. And then we've got the cheetah just hanging out, chilling on his branch, right? And that kind of represents our parasympathetic nervous system, what I like to call our rest and digest nervous system. That's kind of our calm brain. Our sympathetic nervous system, that deer, that part that responds to stressors and threats and things like that, is mostly run by the amygdala. So I always like to tell folks how do we know where the amygdala is? If you point in your eyebrow and you put your finger in one of your ears, where those two fingers would intersect is this tiny little part of your brain called the amygdala. It looks like an almond, and amygdala is actually Greek for almond. That's how it got named. So these respond, this parasympathetic, or the sympathetic nervous system responds to these kind of two forms of stress that we as humans are all very familiar with. There's acute stress. Our boss comes in and demands a report, right? You or a family member gets hurt. Social media doom scrolling, as I like to call it, when you're just going, oh, everything's awful, terrible, right? That acute in-the-moment stress. Then there's also this chronic stress. Managing long-term pain, worrying about external stressors like financial obligations, or some of the systemic stressors like isms, racism, sexism, classism, some of those things that are just kind of always present in people's lives. So when we experience stress, our brain releases these chemicals, hormones, right? So adrenaline is the first one. Fight, flight, or freeze hormone, that causes these immediate bodily reactions. It takes all of our oxygen and blood away from kind of the non-needed systems like immunity, reproduction, and digestion, and puts it towards our muscles, towards our heart, and towards our lungs. Useful in life or death situations, not so useful if you're sitting on your couch just doom scrolling, right? Not so useful if your child just falls down and gets hurt or you bump yourself. Our brains still haven't quite learned that we live in safe little boxes and move around in safe little cars. They still think we're being chased by saber-toothed tigers, right? And so we've got this adrenaline release that comes because of daily living when we don't necessarily need it to be released because of daily living. Then we have norepinephrine. This is an arousal hormone, keeps us alert, increases heart rate, increases aggression. Again, helpful in life or death situation, not so much in everyday life. Norepinephrine can take at least hours, often days, to fully dissipate down to the level it's supposed to be at. How many folks here have had a stressful day, or gotten into a disagreement with somebody or sustained some sort of injury, and the next day you're still kind of grumpy. You're still kind of frustrated, right? That's because the norepinephrine is still heightened, right? And so imagine if we're always on. Some of us are, right? Some of us are always on. And then cortisol. Most folks have heard of cortisol. We often hear it in these weight loss commercials. If you take this pill, it will reduce your cortisol, right? But this is the stress hormone. It takes a little bit longer to get into the system. It increases your blood sugar. Again, it's preparing you to respond to a dangerous situation, which again, life, death, useful. Everyday life, not so much. Long-term activation of the sympathetic nervous system leads to all the things that we hear about: anxiety, depression, digestive issues, physical health complaints, heart disease, sleep problems, weight gain, memory and concentration impairment. All of these things, right? And this is based just on stressors that exist in our real world. It's not as though we can just avoid them. Much of what you're going to hear me talk about today is within the research is going to be related to cortisol, the impact that these different activities have on cortisol, and that's honestly because it's the easiest hormone to test. It's a saliva test. Compared to some of the other hormones, it's more invasive to test. But what we do know is that if cortisol is reduced, we also see a reduction in these other stress hormones. So it kind of goes hand in hand, that if we see cortisol reduced, the likelihood is that in a healthy body, right? Everybody's body is different, but in a healthy body, the entire nervous system is lessened and is quieted down a bit. Parasympathetic nervous system, this is the place we want to all exist in as often as possible. This is kind of the forward-thinking brain. We've got the frontal cortex, some of our logical thoughts, our logical experiences. So dopamine, it's the brain's reward system, right? It creates feelings of ease and comfort. Serotonin. Serotonin is a mood stabilizer. It encourages happiness. It plays a big role in learning and memory storage. And serotonin is vital for sleep. When lights dim, when we are exposed to darkness, serotonin kind of turns into melatonin, which is that hormone that we all need to sleep. So serotonin is very important in our bodies, more than just happiness, right? And then my favorite, oxytocin, is the love hormone, right? This is the key to building and maintaining relationships with other people. It increases our sense of trust. It reduces stress and anxiety, and it lowers the sympathetic nervous system's oversensitivity. So if our sympathetic nervous system has been turned on a lot, you've had a stressful day, you come home to a loved one, feels better, right? You spend time with loved ones, I'm not so stressed. So it really plays a role in reducing the oversensitivity of that fight and flight response. So, not why everybody came here today, but a quick overview so that when I give information, you go, oh, that's what that means, right? Okay, so what people actually came to hear. So from preparation to planting to harvesting, we see so many benefits from gardening. How many folks here have heard of the term third place or third space? It's kind of a newer term, but it's something I think is very useful to talk about. So our home is considered our first place. And then for kids, it's school. For adults, it's workplace, is the second place. The third place are spaces that offer access to interaction with social surroundings that are separate from kind of those first two spaces. So social scientists have suggested that non-monetized, meaning free, right, or very, very affordable. Third places are the glue that holds communities together, right? It's where people can feel a sense of belonging and feel a sense of space, or of place, where they belong. And I introduce folks to this concept because in the last 30 years, we have seen a drastic reduction in third spaces, where people are losing the ability to socialize because everything is becoming monetized or because there's not enough funding, and so we're seeing community centers closed, things like that, particularly in rural areas, right? Good news is we are seeing a resurgence of community gardens as being these non-monetized third places where people are able to interact, see one another, socialize, feel like this I have worth here, and we're seeing positive impact that this can have on community members. So University of Essex has been doing some really amazing research. I highly encourage folks to look at it if you're interested in research. But they showed that as participants, they were studying gardening. How does gardening impact us, right? And they showed that as participants sowed and planted and tended to vegetable and flower gardens, their self-reported life satisfaction and their mental well-being increased by 9%. No other interventions, just the act of giving people gardening to do, right? Increased by 9%. And when it was in community gardens, one of those third places, there was also a substantial decrease in loneliness, and that impacts that social realm of wellness. We know that loneliness is a major contributor to dementia and other health-related concerns, and so making sure that communities have access to accessible community gardens is one way that we can really support our communities and support ourselves in maintaining holistic wellness. How many of you have ever named a plant? Yep, we've all named plants. And how many people have gotten sad when a plant dies? Yes, right? That's oxytocin, right? That's that oxytocin. You have an emotional connection to it. And so oxytocin is released when we interact with other people and when we're tending to and caring for other things. So I kind of like to think of the garden as this mutually beneficial. As we tend to it, it also tends to us. Some of you may be thinking, okay, but it's Iowa. this time of year, can't always get out in the garden, right? What about winter? So I've got some answers for you. When we look at the planning and preparing for garden, even inside, right? You're flipping through your seed catalog. Who's been looking through seed catalogs? Who's already ordered seeds, right? Yeah, so we're flipping through those seed catalogs. We're increasing our creative brain and we're building new neuron connections. So when we're thinking about future-oriented things and making plans, we're building those new connections. Daydreaming and planning also releases dopamine. It feels good to be creative, it feels good to complete tasks, and dopamine really is released when we're being future-oriented. A not-so-fun fact, the volume and weight of the brain, right, decreases at a rate of approximately 5% per decade after 40 years of age. Ugh. Who wants to hear that, right? Because there's a reduction in neuron growth and connectivity. But I share that because I also have some positive news for folks. There's this thing called brain nerve growth factors, right? So scientifically it's known as BDNF, which is, I'm going to look at my notes here so I say it correctly, right? Brain-derived neurotrophic factors. So these are proteins. These are proteins that float around in our brain and kind of help support our brain. They support neural survival, so they keep the brain living longer, right? They promote growth and plasticity, so kind of keeping more neurons around, and also plasticity is that ability to kind of learn new things, make new connections, and it also supports neurons talking to one another. So research recently done looking at BDNF, particularly around gardening. So we see gardening as one really important way and task to increase BDNF. It is significantly increased after gardening activities that include cleaning out a garden plot, something in this nice weather many of us probably have started to do, right? Raking out the old leaves, kind of pulling some of the old stuff out. Hopefully we leave the stuff for the wildlife until now, because they need it over winter, right? Digging, fertilizing, raking, planting, transplanting, watering, and then continuing to care for that garden. We see significant increases in BDNF. Planning and preparing for that garden also plays a role in increasing BDNF. So this is because we are engaging long-term and procedural memory. So long-term memory and then procedural is that how-to memory. And by using these skills regularly, we see a decrease in symptoms of dementia and other brain-related disorders. So in short, keeping busy planning, prepping, and caring for our garden really supports the brain in staying flexible and healthy. Physical stuff. When we garden, right, we also are engaging in mild to moderate exercise and assisting ourselves in maintaining dexterity. So that kind of impacts that biological, physical realm of wellness. More dexterity and continued support of muscles, continuing to move muscles, keeps the body and joints active overall, which means that we're less likely to experience injury and we have a more resilient body. Mild to moderate exercise out in the garden also lowers cortisol levels, right? That stress hormone. And we really want to keep cortisol in check. So you heard earlier about how serotonin plays a role in assisting us in sleeping, right? So when we have increased cortisol, cortisol blocks serotonin from converting into melatonin. How many folks have had a stressful day and then struggled to sleep that night? Right? I struggled to sleep last night because I was going to be in front of a bunch of people. I bet my cortisol levels were a little high. But when we reduce those cortisol levels, so when we are active, when we are moving around the garden, when we're planning, when we're tending, when we're caring for the garden, we see that reduction in cortisol and it impacts our sleep, right? Time in sunshine also increases serotonin levels. So being outdoors not only reduces cortisol, but it increases serotonin with vitamin D exposure. So vitamin D specifically helps our brain not only release more serotonin, but also increases the uptake or the use of that serotonin, and it triggers dopamine production, right? So vitamin D exposure leads to this improved mood and lessen of depressive symptoms. A note that I should have said at the beginning that I'm just remembering to say now, this does not mean that this is a treatment for mental health that exists. So mental health exists, depression exists, anxiety exists. Simply I would never say, well, if you garden, it would just go away, right? This just means it's helping us be as healthy as possible. Let's see. Okay, so what we consume impacts us, right? So when we garden, we consume beneficial or friendly soil bacteria, and these soil bacteria are often linked to positive emotions and improved immunity. So Mary O'Brien is an oncologist in London who has been inoculating lung cancer patients with a strain of Mycobacteria vaccae, which is a very common bacteria that's in the soil. Anytime we mess around or play or dig with the soil, anytime we disturb soil really, it's kind of moving it into the air and we're breathing it in, we're inhaling it in. But she's an oncologist, and she decided to inoculate folks with this bacteria just to see what happens, see if their symptoms improved. Again, it's a soil-based microorganism, right? In addition to fewer cancer symptoms, it's not a cure for cancer, right? I think that's really important to say, but in addition to fewer cancer symptoms, which is what she was hoping to see, what they also noticed is a drastic improvement in emotional health, in vitality, and in cognitive functioning. So not what they expected, but that was kind of a side effect of interacting with this, because it increases serotonin in the brain, right? So this bacteria, we can get this bacteria also by eating plants that grow in the dirt where this bacteria exists. Mycobacteria vaccae and then other germs and bacteria in the soil also impact our immune systems. So studies have shown that folks who are not regularly exposed to some of these germs in the soil have increased cases of asthma, allergies, autoimmune issues, right? And so the hygiene hypothesis is a part, if that's something that interests you, hygiene hypothesis is a part of what they suggest this is a part of. When we garden, we're also more likely to increase our consumption of nutrient-dense foods. We know, right, garden-grown foods have a much higher nutritional value when compared to store-bought foods. And a lot of the reason that is because store-bought foods are often picked prior to ripening, and then they're gassed with ethylene, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen for transportation so that they don't ripen in the transport, so that they ripen by the time they get to the grocery stores, and they look pretty, and then people want to buy them. And often they're stored for a long time. Some research has shown that plants lose about 30% of nutrients 3 days after harvest. That's wild to me. And that's kind of on the conservative side. So University of California studies have shown that vegetables lose about up to 55% of vitamin C within 1 week of being harvested. 1 week of being cut off that mother plant, they lose 55% of vitamin C. Some of our produce doesn't get to our grocery stores for weeks, right? What does that say? Again, both fresh foods and then soil particulates that we interact with when we're gardening also create or contain, these pre- and probiotic bacterias. Probiotics have, in the last decade, really gotten a name for themselves. I think that's something a lot of people have heard about now, but that's part of what supports what I call our second brain, right? Or it's in our gut, so it supports our gut health. That second brain has over 100 million neurons that it communicates to our brain with. Remember talking about those positive hormones? 50% of our dopamine is created in our gut. 50% of it. So if our gut bacterium, our gut microbiome is off, that's going to impact the production of these hormones. So whole healthy foods, we want to look for different colors on our plates to help support that dopamine. I work with teenagers, know a handful of Skittles does not count as colors on your plate, right? Darn it, yes, disappointingly so. But looking for multiple colors, right? Leafy greens. Second brain also creates 90% of that serotonin. 90%. Right, is created in our gut, and so one of the best ways we can support that is to eat a wide variety of fiber, right? Fibrous foods, so fruits, vegetables. Leafy greens really help to support both dopamine and serotonin. I threw a lot of information at you about gardening in specific. We have a few more things to talk about, but I hope that helps better understand that this myth of the happy gardener is actually kind of true, right? That there's some truth behind that. So I want to talk with you about a couple other kind of non-gardening but nature-specific ways that we can support our own and others' holistic health. Okay, so Forest bathing. Is forest bathing something anybody here has heard of? A few folks, right? It is a Japanese practice of the process of relaxation in the forest. It's known as Shinrin-yoku in Japan. It's a method of being calm and quiet among the trees, simply observing nature around you while you are actively engaging in your senses. What are you seeing? What are you smelling? What are you hearing? What are you feeling? Etc. It boosts our health and well-being in a variety of ways. So one research looked at 600 folks, and when they compared people who gazed at a forest scenery, only gazed, not even moving around in it, just sitting in the forest, compared to folks who were sitting in urban settings for 20 minutes, right? The average concentration of cortisol was 13% lower. Substantial, just sitting and observing reduces that cortisol. Phytoncides are these chemicals that plants give off, and studies have shown that when we breathe it in, it's associated with improvement in our frontline immune system. It supports our frontline immune defenders, right? We see this particularly in NK cells, which are called natural killer cells. Those are cells that attack both infection and tumor-producing cells. So they're a part of our immune system. After 3 days of camping, so being out in the wilderness for 3 days, this was tent camping, so not camper camping. So that means actually breathing in the air of outdoors, right? So camping for up to 3 days. It doesn't mean camper camping doesn't help. We just haven't studied that, right? So that's a lot of what it means when I have research and you go, well, what about this? We just don't know yet. But tent camping, we saw 50% increase in NK cells, right? 50%. And that lasted for a month until it slowly started to come down to its normal levels. That is wild to me. That says, hey, if we just spend 3 straight days every month out in nature, we're increasing our immune system pretty wildly. Again, that does not mean that it is a cure for tumors, right? It is not a cure for these things. I think sometimes that gets a little messy, and I don't want folks to go, so you're saying if I'd just gone out in nature, I might not have experienced cancer? That's not what I'm saying, right? Just that it helps produce and support our wellness. When we go for a walk, heart beats faster, which circulates more blood, gets oxygen to our organs, including our brain. And so many experiments, lots of folks know, gosh, if we move, if we stay moving, it's going to help us. We perform better on memory tests. It helps with our attention, even after a mildly exertive walk. So the act of walking itself, regardless of scenery, I shouldn't say despite, but regardless of scenery, is going to be good for you. But leisurely walks in natural areas compared to urban areas. So folks went on leisurely walks at least 20 minutes in natural spaces, including forests and prairies, compared to urban walking, meaning in town, right? In town walking. Shows a 12% decrease in the stress hormone cortisol, 7% decrease in that sympathetic nervous system activity, and a 5% decrease in heart rate. In spite of moving, right, it decreased the heart rate compared to the urban setting. That is just wild to me. Anytime I think, do I want to, drive 10 minutes to go hiking at this place, or should I just go on a walk in my neighborhood? I go, I don't know, which do I want to do? Moving in my neighborhood is just fine, right? It's still very good, but that natural space just gives us a little extra boost. When we walk on a regular basis out of doors, so being out of doors, we also see more of that connection, more of that neuroplasticity, more connection of those brain cells, right, transmitting those messages from one part of the brain to another. We see a staving off of some of that withering of brain tissue, some of that reduction of the brain weight we see when folks are actively moving outdoors on a regular basis. And we see that stimulation of neurogenesis. So that walking out of doors in natural settings really, really positively supports our brain. Walking in nature also offers surprising healing benefits to our emotional side. As a therapist, this is something that I care about a lot. How many folks here have ever relived an embarrassing or uncomfortable moment from years ago, and even in the moment cringe at the idea? Those emotions come flooding back, right? What about worrying about the future? keeping yourself up at night thinking about the future, right? So this behavior of reliving past worry or worrying about the future is called ruminations, right? Ruminating. Now, when we use self-reflection by itself can be useful. We might relive happy memories. We might use it as a decision-making tool. Ooh, that thing I did didn't work out so well. I might do something different next time. So self-reflection in and of itself is great. It's what helps us learn and grow. But ruminations are often described as this maladaptive form of self-reflection because no real growth is happening at the time. It's kind of a whole lot of inner critic, inner bullying stuff. And ruminations activate that sympathetic nervous system. But that feeling that, oh, I can't believe I did that, that is activating that nervous system in a way that is flooding yourself with hormones, even though you're worrying about something in the future or something in the past, not something that's happening right now. What we know about stressful events, brain does a better job of recalling stressful events than not stressful events. Those stressful events are generally they elicit a stronger emotion. So we are more likely to feel a stronger emotion at a bad memory or a future worry than we are at reliving something that felt good, a joyful memory. Part of that is the brain's survival, right? The brain's intention is trying to survive us. I have to remember the bad things so we avoid it. Not so useful when it's not a saber-toothed tiger and it was falling down the stairs in junior high, right? So we've got there's a handful of studies now that have kind of keep showing the same thing. We take folks who are walking in urban areas for 30 to 90 minutes, folks who are walking on a treadmill for 30 to 90 minutes, or folks who have what we call a brief nature experience, meaning walking out in nature for 30 to 90 minutes. So all participants are moving between 30 and 90 minutes. Those who actively moved on the treadmill and folks who walked around in town showed no reduction of ruminative parts of their brain on the brain scans. That part of the brain was still active and was still kind of shooting the neurons in creating some of those uncomfortable feelings. But there was a mild reduction of self-judgment. So even though the brain didn't show like it was doing anything, folks still reported, I do feel after that walk like I'm less likely to judge myself, slightly, right? And so that shows that like moving in general can be helpful, but the impact of the brain didn't change. But those who spent time in nature, right, their brain scans showed, again, a significant, so the term significant in research means it's enough to be reported, showed significant change, a reduction in the activity of the rumination part of that brain. And all participants reported less feelings of that self-judgment and self-doubt. So it really shows like, wow, what we're doing and the scenery we're doing it really matters. I have a song. I didn't know the tech that we might have, so I brought it on my cell phone. So I'm going to see if this works. But I'm just going to ask folks who here has heard this song, if it wants to play. Okay. Is this going to play for me? Everybody knows this song, right? So that's Vivaldi's Spring. That's what that song is actually called. Research has shown that this song in particular, when compared to other forms of music, helps plants grow stronger and they yielded more produce. Why, right? We might say, that's wild. What do you mean? Because the violins in this song mimic bird song. He intentionally wrote the violins to mimic bird songs. Singing birds help living things grow, right? Both plants and us as humans. So research again has shown that bird abundance near your house impacts your mental health. The higher bird abundance you have, the lower depression, anxiety, and stress levels people report. Another study published in 2020, this time in Ecological Economics, shows a correlation between reports of happiness and number of bird species around people's homes and towns. So being near 14 bird species or more, but 14 was their cutoff. The authors noted that it significantly increased folks' well-being, and it was equal to making over $150 more each month. That was one of the metrics they used. So another study has shown that of all natural sounds that people might hear, babbling brook, wind in the trees, people are most likely to associate birdsong with stress recovery and attention restoration. So this is something that I talk a lot about, particularly with my parents of kiddos with ADHD. We just don't have time to get into it today, but attention restoration theory, ART, I highly recommend if you're interested, look it up. Nature it's just fascinating, the impact that nature can have on our ability to pay attention. Especially with these devices, our brain is being trained to pay less and less and less attention. Participants also who listened to a more diverse bird song, so up to 8 species in this particular research, reported a decrease in depressive symptoms and significant decreases in anxiety. So it had a little impact on depression, but a substantial impact on anxiety. Scientific reports, another research in the last handful of years, found that seeing and hearing birds improves people's mental wellness for up to 8 hours. And so that means starting your morning out, intentionally trying to hear some birds, trying to just notice what you're hearing can improve your mood throughout your workday at least, right? So you really can see the impact that our little winged creature can have on us. You all can take a moment. I'm not sure, do we have time or do we need to be done? We're good? Okay. I would love folks to kind of think, your handout also has some further activity for you to do on your own, ways to be mindful and present in your time with nature. Okay, I think, is there anything else that's happening here right now?
Let's
okay.
give Ann a hand.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you very much.